So we will start with the inaugural lecture, Imagine a Space Filled with Data, the Architecture of Interactivity. My function as to coordinate here at this panel is to coordinate the time and the conversation between keynote speakers and commentators. And now I will give the word to Monika and Wolfgang. Thank you again for your presence here. And as I said, we have 3 sections. Each section will have comments. In the end of the 3 sections, we will have a special invitee, and then we have the debate. So I thank you very much again, and I give the word to Monika and Wolfgang.
Everybody was an artist at the time, and we were influenced by Hannah Arendt, Joseph Beuys, Kraftwerk, and the theater director Klaus Michael Grüber. Of course, also of many others, but these were important people for us at the time. In our research, we became interested in the concept of interactivity as a thinking space, as well as in living in mixed realities in the real and the digital world. In West Berlin in the 80s, we lived on an island. We were surrounded by the Berlin Wall and separated from East and West Germany. We asked ourselves, how will the digital influence our life and how to overcome borders? Yeah, the first project I wanted to introduce is Berlin Cyber City from 1989. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Cyber City was our attempt to overcome borders in people's minds. Visitors meet at a table with an aerial map of Berlin. The interactive table is the entrance to the virtual city and the input interface. The simulation of the virtual city as a wall projection behind the table is the output interface. Literally in between is the human being. Movement on the table shows the viewer's position and generates real-time movement in 3D visualization. Visitors perceive the sensor as an object resembling a small camera eye. It connects the digital city model to a jointly experienced space of movement. The interface stands for traveling with a finger on the map and brings East Berliners and West Berliners, former enemies, into conversation. Philosopher Hannah Arendt writes about the table as a place of communication that enables differentiation. Around the table, visitors take on a position in a world that is not their own to gain new perspectives. Next slide, please. Touching something and changing one's perception just by moving with the sensor in hand was completely unusual at the time for visitors in an exhibition. Next slide, please. Next. The table offers, we show a short film about this work. The table offers freely chosen routes through the center of Berlin, around the death strip, where the now open wall used to be impassable. East and West Berliners comment on the respective unknown parts of the city and describe them each other. And during this exhibition, people dive into the Stasi and Nazi past just with the sensor of the virtual reality data glove. You see Brandenburg Gate, Potsdamer Underground Station, animated as it was built in 1936 and still in ruins from the Second World War in 1989. And how the West Berlin train runs through the closed underground station during the Stasi period, where all these underground stations were closed. We were able to film in the Nazi bunkers with huge wall paintings. In those days, we were not interested in using virtual reality to escape into unreal worlds, as our partner and VR pioneer Jaron Lanier suggested. Rather, we wanted to evoke hidden memories and ideas for the future of Berlin with this work. Please, the next slide. A project which has to do with the cyber city is Home of the Brain from 1990. The title represents the idea of a networked space of knowledge. The internet at that time was understood as a kind of world brain, driven by collective intelligence because everyone would be involved in the future democratic society, as we believed. The virtual reality installation reflects on the new medium and presents the media discourse itself as a philosophical debate. It is a virtual exhibition of theoretical concepts with 4 buildings of thought, the houses of media philosophers. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next. The color-coded objects stand for different concepts of thinking and consist of written words and spoken statements. The houses of adventure, catastrophe, utopia, and hope are dedicated to the opposing positions of Willem Flusser, Paul Murillo, Marvin Minsky, and Joseph Weizenbaum, all of them important voices on digital culture in the early 1990s and still today. These 4 thinkers form the narrative mood of the virtual environment. Next slide, please. The visitor equipped with data glasses and data glove participates in a discourse. Text fragments can be heard, voices become identities. Derrick de Kerckhove at that time remarked another narrative aspect. It's like walking through other people's thoughts, he said in Monte Carlo when he heard my presentation then. Next slide, please. Willem Flusser, the media philosopher, became a passionate visionary about the digital revolution while he was searching for an answer to Auschwitz. For him, philosophizing meant orienting oneself in a confusing situation. In a letter written on his old typewriter, Flusser asked with expectation when we could build his red house of adventure. Sadly, he died soon after. Next slide, please. Next. Next. The architect Paul Virilio calls his cultural theory dromology, the theory of speed. His credo, speed destroys space and compresses time. As early as in 1990, he writes that screens were digital windows to the analog world that no one had to enter anymore. His book, in German Rasender Stillstand, could be translated as Stand Still at Full Speed. Virilio, very charming, agreed in a handwritten letter in French that we can use his interview to set up his yellow house of catastrophe. According to Marvin Minsky, an implanted chip in the brain is the solution so that children do not have to start learning over and over again. They should already be born with the knowledge of the world. In his mind, there is no difference between the real human and his digital clone. Minsky was one of the founders of artificial intelligence as a new scientific discipline in 1956. His ideas were similar to those of Sigmund Freud. Our mind is ultimately the interaction of many individual agents who can be in conflict with each other. We emailed Minsky that his agent will live in the blue house of utopia. Please, the next slide, please. Joseph Weizenbaum's greenhouse. Joseph Weizenbaum is concerned about the power of the computer and the powerlessness of human reason. He was the creator of the first artificial intelligence program, ELIZA, simulating a virtual psychotherapist, especially because of his experience that practicing psychotherapists seriously believed that ELIZA would lead to an automated form of psychotherapy. He converted into a social critic and became an opponent of Minsky at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab. Next slide, please. The film, the video, please. Visitors explore the virtual space by flying through with the black data glove. And in the video, the philosopher's voices, maybe you have to make it very low, the voice, the voices, because I try to translate and speak over. It is really nice to listen to these voices, and the video stops now. I don't know why, but you hear Flusser's voice saying what characterizes the current information revolution is not only a recording from letters
aus Buchstaben
to numbers
einerseits und Bildern andererseits,
on the one
sondern
hand,
es ist auch eine Umschaltung des Fluxus der Informationen.
but it is also a switching of the fluxus of information.
Erwerben wollten, musste sich in den öffentlichen Raum begeben.
In the past, if you wanted to acquire information, you had to go into public space. And people who had to say something went into the public space
und andere hinkamen und das dort publizierten.
So the public space was the place where people exhibited and others came to carry home what was published there. And today,
die wenden der Politik und einander, sie wenden sich einander zu. Und das ist eine neue Struktur, die nicht mehr Politik ist, sondern eine Vernetzungsstruktur.
And this is no longer politics, but a network structure.
Le nouvel espace est un espace vide. Ce n'est plus un espace-temps.
And his voice.
Le
the
temps
new space
est,
is a
je
space
dirais,
of
manipulé.
speed, not the space of time. It is a space where I can manipulate time. What I manipulate is not the time of the human, but the time of the apparatus.
C'est un milieu.
It is no longer a medium, but rather the carrier medium of a certain milieu. Joseph
Was ist denn der
Weizenbaum's
Unterschied
voice?
zwischen dieser Hand und der menschlichen Hand? Warum sollen wir überhaupt einen Unterschied suchen? Weil die menschliche Hand zum Beispiel gehalten werden kann.
What is the difference between this technical hand and the human hand? Why are we even looking for a difference?
Für den Mensch eine gewisse Bedeutung.
Because the human hand, for example, can be held by a beautiful woman, and this attitude has a certain meaning for the human being, but none at all for this mechanical hand.
It's a waste of time to learn things over again.
Marvin Minsky says it's a waste of time to learn things over again. Oh, he speaks English. Children will acquire knowledge in this much faster way. Maybe you can listen to him.
Get that.
While in Berlin Cyber City, the rawness of virtual reality, simple grey blocks of houses create space for one's own thought, the table proves to be a discursive interface. In Home of the Brain, the use of data glasses guarantee close reading in splendid isolation. The ambient light and shadows programmed with Radiosity software are reminding of the metaphysical images of Giorgio de Chirico. So this is the end of the first section that we present these two projects. We will start after the comments with the second section. I would like to ask the commentators or Anja.
Yeah, thank you, Monika, for the presentation of the two projects. I would like to remember that Home of the Brain got the prize, Golden Licker Interactive Art Prize in 1992. It was a surprise to see an installation like this. So I would like to ask now Karin Ohlenschlaeger to comment and Margit Rosen to complete. Please. Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Hello.
Do you want me to talk?
Yes. You have like 3 minutes.
Okay, I will do my best.
Okay.
Before giving my comments on this first section of Monika and Wolfgang's work, I would like to share a few words about the context in which their work arose, even if we saw some very important part of this historical context. Because following the World War II, as most of you might know, especially since the 60s, artists have been working on new communication structures, tools, and methods to contribute to the reconnection of the world divided by the Iron Curtain. Artists did so mainly through mail art, through happenings, video, and other communication tools as telephone, radio, or satellites. And they did it also by exploring new methods of participation, collaboration, and sharing experience and knowledge, as we just saw also through Monika's and Wolfgang's work. In addition, since the 1980s, they have been creating new physical and virtual environments to put their concepts into practice through new structures of research and production. And as we just heard from Monika and Wolfgang, through the construction of transdisciplinary media labs or architectures of interactivity, as they named it. So their work is rooted in all these traditions. And at the same time, their projects illustrate the major step forward in the evolution of media art in our context, and I would like to highlight fundamentally two aspects. Starting with the art history context, Monika and Wolfgang belong to a generation of artists that made visible and experienceable the very deep principles of quantum mechanics. Even if Derrick will talk a little bit more about that fact, I just would like to say that in quantum physics, the observer is always an active part of a system which is to be observed. And his or her presence influences and transforms the system. So we cannot conceive the world as something separated from the user anymore. No, we construct reality by moving through it, by interacting with it, and by thinking about it, because thinking is also a process which involves moving concept, moving information, and moving data through our mind. And both artists expressed also this crucial point in a very clear way when they said media art is not only interprets reality, it also immersively puts the viewer in the picture. It invites the viewer to shape an image of the world by taking an active part in its construction, or that one that reflects the changes in their own thinking. This is for me a very powerful idea, especially if we want to consider the potential impacts of media art in education as well as in cultural or social transformation. And there's the second significant aspect I would like to sign briefly,
Karin,
which is important. Yes, just one.
Complete. I don't want to press, but we can come to this back at the end.
Okay.
If you want to speak shortly the second aspect, or you want to keep it?
Okay, the second aspect important for me in the educational context is that reality is not just a physical, tangible, and measurable world of things around us, but reality is related to the potentiality of becoming, to the potentiality of process-based developments. And the interactive artwork of Monika and Wolfgang shows this very clearly experienceable and understandable. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Karin, to contextualize the project, mainly in Cyber City. Also, we have younger listeners here, and maybe they are not aware of the context of the development and of the difficulties to develop also this part. Margit, Rosen, do you want to complete something?
How many minutes do I have? 1?
2?
2. I just want to say this is one of the key early projects of WeAre in the history of the so-called media arts. And what's very interesting that as compared to the 1960s, where the participation or the activation of the viewer was mainly a physical activation, you had these early examples like Home of the Brain, or also examples by Jeff Bishop, where suddenly language information would come into the participation, which really marked a difference from the purely physical exchange. I had one question, actually, if I may pose one. The space you've modeled is, that's the hall of the new National Gallery in Berlin, built by Mies van der Rohe. And I had wondered, I mean, you could have chosen any space whatsoever. Was there a specific reason why you've chosen the National Gallery as a frame for the Home of the Brain? So.
Yes.
Oh, sorry,
course,
I thought
yes,
we commented already.
Because it was what we found at that time, that one of the first virtual architectures, because, for example, it was planned for Bacardi in Havana, Cuba, as headquarters, and then as the history has shown, that the Havana crisis, Cuba crisis came across, and so Berlin was so eager to buy this design, so to say. So it was like a plug-in building, and also in its structure, everybody knows. I think this is sort of nearly. No space building or empty space building in the first front. So that was a reason. But another reason was we were in the beginning of the Home of the Brain. We thought we want to do a real conference, and we chose for this the National Gallery, and then asking the four Flusser, Minsky, Weizenbaum, and so, we found out they never would meet at one place at the same time. So we decided to do this in virtual reality. So that's the background in brief.
Yeah, that's interesting, Wolfgang, that you remember us. Yeah, thank you, Margit, also. So let's.
I just want to add that the story was longer. Yeah, the story was longer.
Yeah, the story
because
was longer.
It started at another place, and it should be a real theater performance, and it was in a house which did not exist anymore than at the Berlin Wall. And then we came to the National Gallery because it was the best example for that. But just to mention, okay, we go.
Let's pass to section 2. Liquid views and energy passages, and then we have the commentators.
Yeah, and thank you for your comments. That's very, very interesting for us, and that's what we hope that we get so much from that. Can we have the slide, please? I'm sorry that I cannot get it myself. Okay, thanks. Regarding the concept of interactivity, unlimited interaction only works with as few specifications as possible. The supporting element must be culturally known, even unconsciously, as in the next work, The Story of Narcissus. Liquid Views, 1992. Here, the reality of water is created by artificial intelligence and leads in a reflective way to an encounter with the second self, to quote Sherry Turkle. In Liquid Views, a horizontal screen shows a shimmering water surface. The sound of water can be heard. When approaching, the viewer sees herself reflected in the water. A fingertip on the touch-sensitive screen glass causes waves and the image melts. At the same time, the water surface is projected onto the wall behind the installation. Looking upwards, the viewer sees herself as an observer, as if enlarged by a magnifying glass. The intimate introspection turns into an unconscious public display of the self. The performative dimension of liquid views is evident in this process of approaching, exploring, and transforming. The self-experience of the recipient is becoming a component of the work, as Karin mentioned before. The phenomena of a mixed reality is revealed in the transition from the observational to the operative perspective. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah. People in Los Angeles play wildly around, while in Madrid many people kiss their partner in front of the water image. In Japan, the installation was almost shut down because the giggling girls on the big public screen did not realize that they had to bow to the sponsors. In Mexico, guided groups of visitors just stood adoringly in front of the shimmering water screen. In Paris, several men did not look in the water because they didn't feel beautiful enough. In Germany, someone wondered why the water did not run out. It looked so real. And it was so surprising for the people at that time in 1992. Depending on the cultural condition, the reception was completely different and is rooted in the staging of the installation, a half-intimate environment in which the audience observes someone who at first feels unobserved. The difference to selfies on a smartphone today is the lack of differentiation. Remember the mirror stages by psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan? He describes how someone recognizes him or herself in the mirror as the one who is perceived by others. The self thus arises as an imaginary entity outside of us. Next slide, please. The video. We always wondered what it is to be called, the interface here. What is the interface? Your own image in the mirror, the water waves, the touch-sensitive glass, all of it? Mark B. and Hansen, literary scientist, describes that the image is scattering but far from ending engagement. In fact, catalyzes a transition to another realm, to the realm of the disintegrated image. He observes the mirror becomes the actor. The writer Michael Joyce sees liquid views as both, embedded in cinema and verbal narratives. A woman greets her past self as if a sister or lover. A man attempts to trick the self he was instance before. This metafiction are, of course, tales that the external viewer produces.
Okay, yeah, my comments are just about liquid views. Well, the first thing that fascinates me as an art historian who I am is how this ancient story of Narcissus still serves as a motive for artists and as a medium, how Rosen and Strauss put it in this time. Especially since such mythological themes are less part of the canon of the contemporary artists or media artists, especially, one could assume. And especially since the discrepancy between ancient source and technological innovation realized leads to attention, or as Roland Barthes put it, a punctum. And I think such a momentum is an important element of the work, also in terms of reception. And Monika and Wolfgang once told me that the subtitle, A Virtual Mirror of Narcissus, was added later because at first no one of the exhibition visitors wanted to touch the screen because you had the museum feeling where you're not allowed to touch things. And therefore a kind of instruction was needed. And it's just precisely at the moment of touching, two worlds meet each other. One, an external one to which this technical setup, the exhibition space, or even the audience belongs, and an internal one which takes place between the user and its virtual counterpart. And in this moment, so many levels meet, which constitutes the aesthetic attraction. I don't know, do I have a time for a second point, Anja?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. The second point is the materiality in liquid views, where water occupies a central position, not as an actual or sculptural element like liquid water, nor as an iconographic motif or reflecting surface, but as animated water. And in addition to the screen, the acoustic splashing also plays a role in liquid views, but more for the immersive spatial situation. And in contrast to classical art, participation, interaction, performativity are an important feature in liquid views, as in many other works of media art and art in general since the 60s. However, this animation in form of liveness, synchronity, immersivity, and augmented reality is a special feature that hardly appears in other works in this way. For this, water as an element such as its actual all-pervasive, it's chaotic because it is liquid, fragile, and unstable. And this animation of the waves in liquid views, in particular, stand thereby in the context of the in this time contemporary system theory, which in turn has its origins of cybernetics, and there the closest circle to this post World War II research, which it's shown in liquid views. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel Becker. Karin, did you want to say something?
Yeah, very briefly. I would like to add that this interactive installation was really a visionary contribution to experiencing the impact of the digital age in the new construction of our identity and in the perception of self, or in the new entanglements between private and public space. As the artist just explained, the big difference between the conception of self and selfie culture consists of the fact that the selfies reduce the presence of self to an egoic and pathologic experience, which transforms the self into a product to be consumed by others. And in contrast, the self-perception of liquid views immerses us in the poetic dimension of the self as an open, ever-changing flow of potentialities in process. Thank you.
Thank you both. Great. All three.
Monika, you want to add something, or we continue with energy passages?
We continue. Yeah.
Okay.
It was great to hear that, but let's continue.
Yes.
Energy passages. Next slide, please.
Yes. Next slide.
Yes, thank you. Energy Passages is from 2004. It's a decade later that we are investigating another form of floating movement and a different type of media mirroring. Energy Passages is a site-specific installation in public space exploring the mood of the people in a city. Every day we filter the 500 most frequent keywords of the daily news and project them as a flow of words onto the public square in front of the Munich House of Literature. Next slide, please. Next. Visitors select single words according to their preference via touchscreen or microphone. Next slide. Next. Next. Immediately, invisible connections between words become visible, represented in the flow of words as a linguistic network of terms. Artificial voices murmur the chosen words. A soundscape surrounds the visitor and touches the body, as sound scientist Holger Schulze notes at the time. Through interaction, the participants produce a living newspaper that reflects their own interests. They become co-authors of emergent narratives. Digital elements are transformed by the audience in an analog way, namely in conversation. The audience's discussion goes far beyond the meaning of the original news and has some poetic dimensions. Next slide, please. Next. While watching the flow of words, the visitors have their own associations. Reading the word Faust reminds a woman of Goethe's Faust, but it refers to a politician who hit the table with his fist, the German word for Faust. Next slide, please. Next.
Video.
Is the video? Next is the video.
Oberhaushalt und ab. Nach 5 Jahren Interesse eigentlich. Artikel Seiten. Streifen. Kamera. 5 Jahre lässt Angaben. Ja. Entwurf. Partei. Frauen. Gästehausstand, Kaffee, Stammtisch, Versicherungen,
Gymnasium,
Kaffeehaus, Feuerwehrleute,
Gymnasium,
Landrat, Donnerstrainer, Deutsche Trainer, Kameras,
Milliarden Trainer, Deutschland. Präsident. Ja.
Oberhaushalt und ab. Nach 5 Jahren Interesse eigentlich. Freisetzung. Einlagen. Prozess. Gäste. Generalstreik. Warschau. Aktienjahr. Ministerpräsident. Donnerstag.
Millionen.
Deutschen.
Ja. Deutschland.
So,
Ja.
next slide, please. I think you can stop. Yes, next slide. At the end of the 4-week event, the protocol of interactivity, a color-coded statistic, becomes visible as an abstract image of the city and the energy of the citizens. One can see that the most frequently used words of the intellectual newspaper makers are rational terms like percent and millions. In contrast, the audience choose emotionally charged terms like price, parents, sacrifice, love, food, girls, happiness. The audience's interventions illustrate the spirit of the place, the poetic energy and the thoughts of the people in this city in November 2004. Next slide, please. Yeah. The workflow plan highlights the architecture of interactivity. Sherry Turkle, professor of science, technology and society at MIT, describes this work as an evocative object. Quote, "The idea of a spatial experience of the discourse of news in urban space and the possibility of deconstructing the newspaper captures the fragmentation of citizens' media experience in a culture of simulation. It thus reflects and concretizes an important cultural and political moment and makes it an object of reflection." So that's the end of energy passages, and I would like to ask for comments from...
Yes. Ryszard, would you like to comment, please?
Yes, sure. I'd like to talk about this work, energy passages, in terms of continuation and break in relationship to the previous artworks, because what is continuous is actually this interesting hybridity of constructed worlds and the focus on augmented reality perspective, because all 3 previous works actually dealt with same complex of issues. Even home of the brain
which is a virtual reality piece and looks like kind of step away from augmented reality perspective. Even this work actually create a kind of extension of brain-mind activities. Experiencing this work, actually you feel like searching the borders of your own mind, which is kind of connect with discourses not belong to you, but becoming yours under your reflection. But what is the break? I think what is very interesting, what make the energy passages, the new step in the development of the art of Wolfgang and Monika, is the focus on community and relationship between individual and community. Because, you know, this is kind of symbolic end of the first, let's say, first chapter of the artwork of Monika and Wolfgang, the three first works we were talking about so far. This is the symbolic closing of this chapter with this narcissistic approach, the mirror of Narcissus. It's just focusing on individuality. And next, we have to do with the work, dealing with, firstly, community, the mode of community, the city as the constructive process. Writing about the works of Monika and Wolfgang in the catalog of the exhibition I curated years ago, I refer to Georgia Agamben's concept of new community without identity, community of which each participant is just the example of this community. And actually the experience of energy passages brings us to something similar. There are plenty of people selecting different concepts, different words, different passages, and we are facing the cloud of emotions, of discourses, of ideas surrounding us. And again, we also have to do with data visualization, which is becoming more and more important in the work of both artists. So this is something very, very particular, the opening of the new perspectives, but in the same time rooted in the previous experiences provided by the works. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ryszard. I'm a co-commentator here at this moment. I feel the same. There's a newness in this project, which was done in 2004. I just finished my PhD in 2002, and you introduced Monika and Wolfgang the word mixed realities. Because before this, we were like separating virtual from they called it real, yeah, concrete reality. And it comes, the technological challenge was the organization of the information communication in the network. This was really a challenge, and the project is pioneer in this way. So I completely agree with Ryszard about his analysis and the importance of this project. Monika and Wolfgang, would you like to add something?
Not yet. Not yet.
Yes, we go to section 3, or
maybe we can, yes, yeah.
So we go to the last section.
So
we go to the last section, and keep people who have questions, please keep it for the end. The last section is Netzspannung.org on Semantic Map. And
oh, thank you. Yes.
Please.
Semantic Map is from 2001. We go a few years back. It's the semantic calculations in energy passages are based on the technique of the knowledge map, which we developed earlier for the digital archive. The last section is about the digital archive and how it becomes accessible via knowledge maps. Based on a neural network that is trained by the human to generate a self-organizing map, the semantic map here is used to structure and visualize large data sets in terms of semantic relations. The documents of artists and projects appear as nodes in a network of thoughts. The static database of information is transformed into an intelligent and navigable knowledge network. The visitor experiences knowledge through differentiation and becomes a sense producer. Semantic Map reminds of Marvin Minsky's vision that the books could talk to each other. Astrophysicist Roger Malina compares the Semantic Map interface to a telescope used for browsing and accessing the cosmos of data. Next, please. The next is now about the Semantic Map, where we needed the the Netzspannung.org archive. We initiated this as one of the first educational platforms and online archives for media, art, and digital culture. The internet platform is an interface that is organized on a cross-disciplinary basis between media, art, science, and technology. Next, please. The statistics of Netzspannung.org show a world map with the international networking of the media art community in May 2008. It also shows the geographical origin of the monthly accesses of the 150,000 monthly visitors at that time. That means 5,000 visitors a day. The most wanted tool shows the most popular pages in the ranking. The Netzspannung.org team at the time were 10 women and 14 men. Since 2001, the platform is archived and 2010, the platform is archived and hosted at the ZKM Center for Art and Media. Please, the next one. Next slide. The next slide is the video, and it is in English, and the interpreters
An archive for media.
I hope they can follow and maybe translate. I think it's
art and digital culture.
I read also.
The internet platform is organized on a cross-disciplinary basis as an interface between media art, media science, and media technology. Netzspannung.org is an information pool for artists, designers, scientists, and scholars. Netzspannung.org presents topics from media art and research such as cultural heritage, teaching culture with digital media, perform and play, on interactive play and stage concepts, and explore information, create knowledge, on visualizing information. The area Positions shows numerous video documentations of lectures given by renowned artists, scientists, and scholars. Selected lecture series are recorded with the aid of a mobile streaming lab and can be transmitted live into the lecture theatres of associated colleges and universities. This networking of lecture theatres expands the possibilities of teaching on the spot and represents a first model of the classroom of the future. The area Learning addresses the question of how teachers and students can be introduced to artistic work with the new media. Here, teachers can find a variety of ideas, suggestions, and teaching examples, showing how they can get children and young people to develop, for example, dancing scrap metal robots, a multimedia music performance, or an interactive exhibition. The Digital Sparks competition provides an insight into media studies teaching at German-speaking colleges and universities. All competition entries submitted by students from the years 2001 to 2003 are archived and can be researched via an interactive map. Netzspannung.org's archive contains over 1,000 multimedially prepared database entries, including research projects, artistic work, and interactive installations, as well as mixed reality performances, experimental formats, and interactive visualizations. Media cultural artists can also help build up the archive directly. The community area is Netzspannung.org's open channel, where artists and designers, as well as scientists and scholars, can publish their projects themselves. In this way, their contributions become part of the archive. The archive is accessed via different interfaces. Lists are useful for tracking down particular people or projects, while graphic knowledge discovery tools, such as the Semantic Map or the Timeline, help users to disclose new connections and content intuitively. The Semantic Map structures, networks, and visualizes the archive's content in terms of semantic relations, It provides users with a navigational system that allows them to rummage through the database, discovering new and hidden connections. The Semantic Map organizes the archive into semantic clusters. The timeline sorts the content of the archive chronologically, presenting it in dynamic time axes, and thereby revealing connections between different content fields. Netzspannung.org is an interface for digital culture and a place for education and learning on the internet.
I wanted to say that's the last slide. The archive interface media flow opens up a media archaeological reference. This is also what you see here in this image is also the archive of Netzspannung.org, but as a media flow. It draws visual similarities to art historian A.B. Warburg's space of thought that builds on the thematic grouping and regrouping of images. With media flow, it receives its digital updates through the database interface as the process of linking or serving becomes relevant. The inherently static database is transformed into a variable time-based medium. The archive becomes accessible, a room filled with data. Paradoxically, the interactive media artists of the 90s did pioneering work, and their results were eagerly taken up by the engineers of the industry. Interactivity in its simplistic industrial form has permeated society. The interface has become intelligence and, as a lifestyle product, is becoming a cultural object of consumer culture. Karin said this before as well. Today, interactivity is omnipresent and thus no longer the core of media art. While one aim of media art was to be unruly or seductive in order to enlighten users or trigger discussions, the consumer interface is subtle and beautifully polished by the industry. If media art still has a task today, then it is to critically accompany the accelerating development of artificial intelligence. So, thank you for listening, and we are wondering about the last comments of the contributors. Or
yes,
questions.
I would like to invite Margit to contribute.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yes.
As we're talking about the archive, I take a short detour. I mean, Wolfgang and Monika belong to those generation of artists when, in the late 1980s, the first computers were available who were powerful enough that you could interact with three-dimensional images in real time. They were this first generation who really redefined what an interface with an information machine could be. And it was really, they were, you could say they were writing the history of the future. They anticipated this generation a lot of things which are here today, like VR, augmented reality, motion capture, sonification, force feedback, and many other things. Which would then later become, as Monika just said, part of our daily entertainment industry. And to know this history is super important for the narrative of our art history and culture and technological history. But most things are not very well known outside our circles of specialists, and there are various reasons, because this media art scene managed to create a temporary public through festivals and conferences, but there was a certain lack of social actors and institutions for preserving the works and stabilizing the knowledge, for ensuring that all these events at work would enter the canon, the collective memory. And due to the fragility of hardware, a lot of these works are lost. And so we really rely heavily on these archives. And there is now a lot of complaint about that this digital history is partially lost. And in the discussion, in these complaints, sometimes the achievements of Monika and Wolfgang exactly in preserving are sometimes a little bit overlooked, because with Netzspannung, they really have created an important platform, a very important tool to create a public, so a public that gathers around common concerns, certain ideas, theories, technologies, art, And it's, as Ryszard said, it was also about community building. It is a rich capsule, which really shows also the discourse of this so-called media art that had developed in parallel and partially in opposition to contemporary art. So it comprises topics that are now 20 years later in the daily news: how digital technologies change our communication, the way we acquire knowledge, the way we remember. And what is really interesting for me as how they approach the archive and the other projects, they never thought about a rigid filing structure in the sense that the database was always just a tool and never a goal. So they offered a large number of interfaces, because this fatal assumption that searching databases would lead to knowledge, they would never go for that, but they allowed for randomness, for discovery, for semantic relations of, and these were technically supported with a semantic web that was really a technology that was totally unexplored in the cultural milieu at that time. There it was, when I saw it for the first time, I was really overwhelmed, because it opened a horizon of what would come, which of course now much more easier than it was then. And it's almost tragic to see that only 20 years later, what they had thought or formalized now slowly enters in what our institutions are doing with their knowledge databases. They were really very late, and they are, in a way, you all know the famous essay by Vannevar Bush, As We May Think, which he published in 1945, where he addressed the problem, what ways do we find to handle all this data? And I think what they made clear is that this how we may think would be a combination of like a conversation of learning people and learning machines, which was not as clear back then as it is today. And a very last word, what's so interesting about this generation, and especially you too, is that you have not just created artworks, but tools. And artworks and tools both belong to our horizon of making, our two modes of making the world or keeping the world inhabitable. So I'm always glad when I learn more about your research.
Thank you,
yes,
Margit. I'm happy.
Yeah, it's really nice to recognize. I think it's really nice, this conversation. We have your first view as artists about what you have done, and then the commentators have a second view, and you're really getting to something, an understanding of the context and the importance.
Yeah, I'm so happy about. May I say something?
Yes,
Anja?
please.
I'm so happy about what Margit said, because when we launched Netzspannung.org, it was in 2001, and it was a few days after the catastrophe of 9/11 in New York, and even then people came from New York and joined, and it was really incredible how many people came to this conference. Also there was this disaster before. And because it was, somebody told me just a few weeks ago, it was like an ignition that people found a way to communicate through this platform, or to dock on to, and that's why I liked so much what Margit just said.
Yeah. There was no Facebook at that time.
Yeah, there was no Facebook. There was nothing. Yeah, and people felt very much alone when they were studying, when they were not at a few media programs like you in Anja. You were in Brazil, and we were wondering to hear also about that. It was very unusual. We were also wondering about when we had our world map and saw where people came from to look at Netzspannung.org. It was so fascinating for ourselves. We learned so much through that. Yeah, who is interested and what is happening there. And we did our Digital Sparks competition in the German-speaking countries also to train people and students and professors Yeah, but I don't want to. Yeah, Wolfgang says I
Yes.
should stop. And
no, really
Ryszard.
interesting to see the background. Ryszard, would you like to add something on the comment?
Yes, yes. I would like to add a few categories. I mean, transdisciplinarity. This is a very important issue nowadays, and this kind of organizing data, this way of involving the participants to becoming actually the user of this clouds of data is very important step, early step towards transdisciplinarity in artistic research and participation. I think that this is very clear that such works make us think about new perspectives of getting knowledge, of being in the process of education. Do we still need traditional institutions, schools, and other spaces when we are actually much more engaged in building ourselves, our perspectives of knowledge, interacting with this kind of structures? So, and this is very important that everyone can take responsibility for the results of this kind of experience, cognitive experience. And this is, we are facing now processes like citizen science, for example, when people actually take the position of researcher without getting involved in institutional frameworks. In this case, we are having to do with educational, analog, similar educational project. So this is actually the new way of dealing with knowledge, dealing with the history, dealing with others, looking for the personal path within the community effort. I think that this work showing clearly how close art is to research, to humanities, to social sciences, that actually we are in a very transdisciplinary neighborhood where everyone can build, because of the possibility of experiencing such works, it's his, her own world related to the words of the others, because they all actually experience the same clouds of data. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ryszard. We finished now the 6 presentations, the 3 sections, and Delma already sent me a message that we have to go on. So I would like to ask Derrick Kerckhove now to do his special contribution as an invitee. It's called Reality Mix, Virtual and Real in Berlin Cyber City and Home of the Brain, really around 5 minutes. Thank you. Derrick, you are here?
I'm just going to, there we are.
Okay.
Hi. Well, I will talk about that, but I would like to come back to the discussion between Karin and Danielle about identity, self, and about liquid views. I've been following the work of Wolfgang and Monika for 30 years, for sure, with great interest. I've been using their work to teach to my students. I've made videos around the theme of liquid views, and liquid views, in fact, is what hooked me to their work. I was very moved by it. I thought it was immensely poetic. And I love the way that Danielle is pointing out this point of contact between the virtual and the real. But let's mention it's also a tactile experience, which is a very powerful aspect of these kinds of work. What liquid views and the question of identity brought up into my mind, and I worked around that theme for a fair bit, was the fact that gradually, as we are delegating so many of our cognitive experience to our machines, they are getting out of us. The future is that that self, which we consider as being the source of decision movement, motivation, that self, which is somewhere in our body, probably closer to the center than in the head, but nevertheless, we never know quite how to situate it. That very self is moving out. It's moving out because it moved in when we learn to read and write. When we start to put language in ourselves, we built ourselves, we built a consciousness, we built an interiority, we built privacy. Now, privacy is the thing that's leaving us. Privacy is what we are not, that intellect, that conscious, that cognitive autonomy that we take for granted is precisely that which is now taken over by business and government. And they do so quite naturally without asking themselves any kind of epistemological question. But for example, the way we relate to Alexa or to Google Assistant or whatever these things is actually allowing them to make decisions for us. And we are actually replacing the memory that we are putting in our smartphone and the judgment that we are yielding to these instruments. We are being replaced. All that which was inside us is now being replaced by algorithms or by the actual effects of algorithms on our sensibility and our emotions. So we're in a much more tragic time than at a time when liquid views was presented. And so there's been an enormous evolution that hasn't been sufficiently recorded. And among the things that I was going to say, and it's going to take maybe a little bit more than my 5 minutes, but it was really the issue, one of the issues that is now finally brought to our attention by the development of physics, and particularly the movement from classical physics to quantum physics, is the problem of reality itself. One thing that hasn't been said about the work of Wolfgang and Monika is that it is constantly questioning the relationship between reality and virtual reality. It's mixed reality, and this is why I'm saying I assume that they had some anxiety about it, and if they didn't, they should. I certainly do. And so the question comes back to Einstein. Einstein, at the very beginning, when he began to pay attention to quantum physics, was extremely anxious about two or three things. One of them was entanglement and non-locality, and the possibility that there could be no communication between two particles that actually responded at the same time to the same changes. And the other one was, in fact, that the slit experiment that actually allows you to see that waves and particles do not function the same way whether observation is on or observation is off. The idea then for Einstein, his conclusion was, well, and the question is then, it's the same question as Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. And for him, it was exactly the same problem. Is there something permanently in continuity outside of us as observers, or is it just me? Quantum physics seems to say it's just you. Whereas classical physics says, well, there is continuity to the world. Einstein never answered that question. Now, let me just put you through this reasoning. All of you have had, I hope, very interesting, fascinating dreams. What is the condition of your dreaming? The condition of your dreaming is that it's really happening. It's totally happening. It's real. There's a continuity that's assumed behind whatever it is that's happening in your dream. Boom, you wake up, it's all gone. Oh, that's surprising. How could I have been so there? How could it be so real, right? Well, it wasn't. Oh, well, if it wasn't, whatever I'm doing now, seeing you there, maybe that too is something that only works because I'm observing you, because I'm listening to you, because zillions of pixels, which are the equivalent in image making to the particles, stay for the while that I'm looking at this screen. It's a very key issue to ask oneself that the very thing that allowed to have the illusion of continuity is the thing that is put into question today. It doesn't mean that it's going to stop, but what it means is that we haven't gone at all to that edge that made that fantastic Giordano Bruno. He lived 25 kilometers away from here. Giordano Bruno was that brilliant and burned alive priest who said, it is not matter that creates consciousness. It is consciousness that creates matter. He is the most forward quantum philosopher that we can hear of, having made that question. At the edge of quantum physics and classical physics, at the edge of thought and matter. That's where the question is. And so I think that those two themes, our identity on the way out, or at least our sense of self being now taken over by some kind of digital twin, that's one area that needs observation. That's other area, and Wolfgang, who is a physics professor himself, certainly understands this. It's time for both of you to get back to work.
Yes, I was thinking the same.
That's a good idea.
Thank
yes.
you. Yeah, thank you, Derrick. We have, I think, like 2-3 minutes to finish, so we will not have the place of questions and answers of the public. Delma is like putting together the questions, and maybe she can send it to you. But maybe the other commentators and Monika and Wolfgang, if you would like to say something. Delma, do we have more time?
No hay más tiempo, lamentablemente. Estamos cerrando 8 minutos, estamos cerrando.
So let's Monika and
lo siguiente. Hay reflexiones, comentarios del público que son muy ricos y vamos a hacer un foro después del Congreso para que Monika y Wolfgang las puedan responder directamente. Hay preguntas que son realmente filosóficas, que necesitan de intercambio y que quizá lleven varias horas para eso. Les agradecemos realmente, sigan enviando los comentarios, el público, por favor, porque me parece que hay entre los comentarios de justamente los contribuidores y los expositores, se ha dado una reflexión muy, muy fértil y que vale la pena aprovechar en un espacio posterior y más amplio. Anja, te dejamos que sigas moderando como lo venís haciendo hasta ahora excelentemente. Muchísimas gracias y queda el cierre.
Okay, so let Monika and Wolfgang say goodbye to us and we finish the lecture.
Yeah, I thank you all very much. It was so inspiring to listen to you and to really what Derrick said, to go back to work is a good idea. The point was always, where could that be? Yeah, because we were looking for the right country and the right city, and now we stay at home, and that's more difficult. Anyway, but we were really happy to hear that, because we try to work on a book about our work, and it's so boring for us because we know everything, and to get inspired by you is so really rich and wonderful for us, because then we might come back and think, okay, it's worth to do it. Yeah,
we have to go back to
thank
work.
you. We have to go back
it
to
was
work.
a very inspiring session for me, and it's an experience like for example, being in a project which is called Hole in Space, so one of the first, which is also one of our role models long before we started ourselves with media art. So I knew it long before, and I always admired this project amongst some others, of course. And so one sentence, what also was a driving power when we started, was the idea, which now is described as transdisciplinarity. And a funny example we had concerning the place where to go. We nearly found a place in a German university where such a transdisciplinary study work combination, say, of design, computer science, and philosophy, literature, science, and so could have started. and we had some first small projects with students running. And the funny thing was that the human science professors found out when we started to write a paper to get funded such thing, that they find out that they would go back more to close reading, and that this transdisciplinarity would be a lot of work. So that was why when we retired and said, okay, then we just do what is in our possibilities now. So, but it was very inspiring for all the ideas and comments from this small circle.
I want to say that because I mixed up my presentation and I could not have the original one. I had in my last version many links to all of these works, and I'm sorry that this was not to be seen now, but I will ask Anja to do, Delma to do this last version then on the web somehow, the whole presentation. So I thank Derrick very much, and I thank Ryszard and Margit and Karin and Daniel all for supporting us, and it was so nice. It was such a great experience. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.